Hi, welcome to Silent Generation. I'm Joseph.
I'm Nathan.
And this week our topic is hunting fashion. So we had tried to record this episode earlier with our friend and listener Eric, but we messed up the file somehow and couldn't get it going. So this is our re-record of it. But big thanks to Eric for helping us put together the docket. We also want to thank our listener Kim Chilla, who knows tons about camouflage broadly and gave us like a nice little write-up kind of running through different types of military camouflage and the changes over time. So we'll be citing him, I guess, a bit in this.
I'm not sure if Kim Chilla is a boy or a girl.
All right, we'll use they. We'll safely use
But
they.
no, I'm very thankful for their advice because they've actually made their own like camouflage patterns, like military camo. But they knew so much about hunting just from their interest in camo that they're able to give us a real leg up. So I'm thankful for that.
Definitely. And we've got a Pinterest board for this episode that's super useful. It's very perfectly curated by Nathan in terms of like I describe it as sedimentary rock, where like there's the different layers. Like if you skim it while listening to the episode, you'll see which chunk we're talking about. Like there's a lot of different hunting fashion styles, and they're sufficiently different that you'll like kind of understand the groupings intuitively.
Yeah. And one more thing before we get started, we unlocked a former exclusive episode on YouTube. Mm-hmm. It's Male Desire, episode 37, and it's gone a little bit viral. We'd like to see the momentum keep going. We won't be unlocking it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything, so you got to listen to it there. Yeah. Hopefully you like it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so starting off talking about hunting fashion. We want to start with like British hunting fashion because they're older than America. And so that forms like a good starting point.
Yeah. And their hunting fashion is very different than here because the people that do it and the way that they do it are entirely different. Here in the US, hunting is primarily like a middle class, maybe lower middle class activity that's done by people who live in rural communities. There, it's a very like upper class thing.
Yeah. It's like they might live in London for much of the year, but they have a country estate. And then if they're out in the country, they want to like maximize countryness.
And not only do they need access to a large estate, but they also need hunting clothes, guns, a horse, hunting dogs, historically for things like fox hunting. And then the owner of the estate also needs to hire like estate keepers, gamekeepers, stable hands. It's not like a cheap leisure activity.
No, definitely. Yeah, like hunting in the British fashion was the first example of like conspicuous consumption, which was this phrase coined by Thorstein Veblen. He wrote this whole book called The Theory of the Leisure Class, an Economic Study of Institutions. And he talked about how in order to signal wealth, you need these pretty ostentatious and visible ways of conveying it, and it's through leisure. And you do it by conveying your leisure, but also it's written from a male perspective, as everything was back then, but you also convey it through the leisure activity of your wife as well, because she only does leisure, and so you have to find like the fanciest leisure activities for her to do that involve the most eyes on it.
Women would participate in British shooting and hunting, and I saw images where they would be seated like on the side of the saddle. It was inappropriate or viewed as immodest for them to sit with their legs spread, I guess.
Yeah, so side saddle was the way. That looks painful. That looks like your spine is
also
just
seems
twisted.
like you're going to fall off more easily. But British hunting with fox hunting is so conspicuous. I mean, think about like leading a pack of like 12 dogs on horseback into the woods wearing a bright red coat.
Yeah.
Like, it's such a different tradition, and it's more of a status symbol, because it actually got outlawed in the UK in 2004. You can still do it in Northern Ireland, but now people of aristocratic backgrounds in the United Kingdom, they still go. They put on the same clothing, they get on horseback, they still have dogs, but they chase artificial fox scent trails into the woods. So they're still doing it ceremoniously. It's called like trail hunting. But yeah, it's completely just symbolic. I can't think of anything that's more of just like a status symbol. Like
I mean,
symbolic.
It must be a testament to how fun it is, that they still want to keep it around in that way. Like, I don't think I always wonder this about leisure activities. Like, is this actually fun? Like yachts, like that has to be fun. Like I've been on boats before. Like it's just elementally a good time. But like being out there in the rain, like your ass hurts. You've been sitting on a horse all day. Like you're wearing uncomfortable clothes. But I think there must be something to it.
Yeah.
And then all the like inconveniences that come with it of like maintaining this estate. Like the idea is that's not an impediment to it. That's half of the appeal. is how hard it is to get all this stuff together. The kind of like organization and resources it takes is like, it's not just the hunt, it's everything that led up to it. The fact that you can do the hunt, you have access to it all.
Yeah. And part of what leads up to it is getting the appropriate clothing.
Yeah.
So there's lots of resources on this. We'll link in the show notes. One good place to start is a piece by the Gentleman's Gazette, Gentlemanly Pursuits, Hunting and Shooting Attire. And so it covers things like Norfolk jackets, covert jackets, and hacking jackets. All of these jackets that have really big pockets for munitions. Mm-hmm. And then you heard about this in the docket. They sometimes have a big pocket in the back for game.
Yeah, like this is really common in like Barber jackets. That's the brand. But they have these like waxed cotton canvas jackets that, I mean, Barber's been around forever, but these jackets are kind of like an 80s onward thing. And the longer lengths of them have this removable rear pocket where you can take the pocket itself out and clean it. And so the idea is like, oh, this is where you like stuff a pheasant after you've shot it. And they sell tons of these jackets. They've just been, I mean, recently it's like a cool British quiet luxury look to have. I see a lot of like professional managerial class type guys wearing them in Chicago. And I was trying to look up like, all right, who actually uses the game pocket? And I found a guy like commenting on Reddit, like, oh, it's great for putting soiled diapers in. And then, you know, if you're out getting coffee with the wife, you put the diapers in there and you take it home, you can rinse the whole thing out. And so it's like, it's much more likely for a dad on the go to be wearing this jacket than a like old timey British sportsman.
Yeah, it's almost like putting a cross-shoulder bag into the jacket in a way.
Yeah.
But it makes me think about how you've commented that the Gentleman's Gazette, they promote styles that are basically period dressing. Like they're just we're so far removed from the world where like you'd want to put like a dead animal in your coat. Like it's kind of impractical.
Yeah, I mean, they're doing God's work by like cataloging all of this stuff. But I think that a lot of their content they make does like apply to guys who are like not looking, like I'm always trying to balance like classic menswear with like being able to go outside and not being made fun of, you know? And there's, I think, a subset of their readership that's just like, no, I do want to dress like a 1920s British aristocrat. And like, I want to know the origins of all the pieces and how it comes together. I was talking with James, our past guest, who wears a lot of suits. And we were saying that like there's a level of menswear you get to where people don't even like belts anymore. They're like, oh no, you have to wear suspenders all the time. Like belts are too new. And it's like, all right, I don't want to drink that level of the menswear Kool-Aid.
You wear stuff sometimes where you'll be like, oh, actually, I'm wearing, what did you say? It was like, I said you were almost wearing a garter.
Oh, shirt stays. Yeah, shirt stays are these like elastic, these are so hard to describe. You'll have to just Google it. But it connects the bottom of my dress shirt to the top of my socks. It's kind of a military/police thing. My dad just always had them around, and they keep your shirt nice and flat and tucked in all day, and they keep your socks from riding down. So I mean, when biking and business casual, I think they're the best thing in the world.
Did they ever like come off though?
Yeah. Every so often I'll like hit something at the wrong angle. The worst possible thing that could happen is if the clip that's on your socks comes off, there's a very small chance that it flies up your pants and hits you in the nuts. It never happened to me, but it's just, you know, one of those things you live in fear of. But yeah, so I don't know. I might be one of the, like probably 1 in 2,000 people who wear like shirt stays. It's such a kind of obscure thing, but yeah.
So another cool detail that shooting jackets in British hunting fashion will have is they'll have like a patch on the right side of the jacket that you can rest your gun on. It's asymmetrical generally, and it's just like a very cool detail. Yeah,
it's I don't know. It's part of the like joy of this style of dressing is like conveying the narrative that you've had these pieces for a long time, or you're going to have them for a long time, or they've been passed down and they've been used so much that like, you know, the elbows are gone, so you've patched them over, and then you patch the shoulder and just like, it's either totally worn out and I had to put this patch on it, or I'm going to wear it out that like, you know, wool wouldn't stand up. It has to be leather. Classic menswear is all about like, it's symmetry is assumed. Humans are symmetrical. But then there's always fun asymmetrical details. The fact that a jacket has to be inherently asymmetrical, and that like a shooting jacket like this calls attention to the kind of like the fact that people are asymmetrical on the inside in terms of their hand dominancy.
Yeah. And one more thing to note on like hunting in the UK is that hunting as a term, it's exclusively reserved for when you're trying to kill things with fur. Shooting is for hunting pheasants and birds and things like that. It's an interesting distinction. And then with hunting for pheasants and things like that, they will try to match the landscape a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was reading about it in articles, I misinterpreted it. I thought they were trying to match like what they're trying to kill.
No.
Like I found this article from Alan Payne. Tweeds are often more muted in color. Greens and browns for a pheasant or pigeon shoot, and darker blues or heather tones for a grouse shoot to blend in with the surrounding countryside and avoid being easily spotted by the birds.
Yeah, I want to believe in this. Like, I just... Is tweed the most like camouflaged material? I mean, we'll talk into the kind of mechanics of camouflage in a second. But this was just stuff people were wearing regularly. But I own quite a bit of tweed, and it is like I was indoors wearing tweed, and I'm like, I should be on a marshy like field right now. Like this would make a lot more sense out there. I'm kind of like cooking a bit in this like 72-degree room.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about because like with American hunting fashion, we're going to talk a lot about camo. This is the only part of research I did on this where it touched on those ideas of trying to blend in with the environment. Because it seems like the color scheme of British hunting fashion, it's more so just practical because you get dirty out there. They want it to be kind of dark browns and things like that.
And this fits the American view that everything's a little more dressed up and fancier in England because they are a little much more like they're so often wearing a 3-piece suit. They're wearing a tie. Which, like, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for ties, but like in any kind of strenuous activity, I just can't imagine it. But it comes out of this idea that you should respect your quarry or the thing that you're hunting by dressing up. And it's such a cute idea because the deer doesn't care if you're wearing a tie or not. Like, it doesn't know. But it kind of reflects this idea that you know. Like, you have to dress up for your quarry because you have to, like, hold it to a high standard. As if you're meeting someone that you respect, you dress up for it. And that, I think, is pretty alien to Americans, I'd say.
Yeah. And comparing, like, U.S. to British hunting fashion, it is really, like, everyday people that seem to do it here because also so many people... I was looking at statistics where it's, like, close to 25% of Wyoming and South Dakota do it, which is kind of wild.
Yeah. It's in America, it is, I learned, actually a shrinking population of hunters as the general populace. But maybe the people who are hunting more.
Yeah. I mean, everything's polarizing in the world we live in.
It's like, I don't know, I think broadly, it feels like people get much more specialized and serious about hobbies nowadays. And not saying, I also talk about the Redditification of hobbies where people like just take it too seriously and become gear obsessed. But yeah, I think there could be maybe a little bit of that going on. But this look, like the British classic sportsman look, is so powerful. When I was walking around in Copenhagen, I hopped into a store to stay warm, and it was like a British hunting fashion store in Denmark. And it was like tons of Barbour jackets and tweeds and like, I know there was like stuffed animals on the walls and stuff like that. And I'm like, this is like, it's funny this is appealing across the continent because, you know, England industrialized so early. They had to fence off their wildlife so early that it became this precious resource, like free land, which you could hunt on. And Denmark is the same way. It's so, and like the Netherlands over there is so thoroughly urbanized across the whole small country. Like, I think for them, like even the English model of restricted hunting is still like a fantasy to them because there's like, that's more hunting land than they have out there.
Yeah. They have a much higher population density. I remember when we were doing the Megalopolis episode, like the blue banana, they were even like more dense than the UK.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about tartans?
Yeah. So a connection between like British and American hunting fashion is tartans and flannel. So flannel is like the material. It's wool, like woven a certain way. And tartan is the fact that it has horizontal and vertical overlap, basically. So we get a little confused in America, like a lot of things. And then you introduce the word plaid, and then everything also gets messed up because that's like a different etymology and everything too. But yeah, like tartans were, when they were brought over to the US, it was just in the form of blankets, basically. So these were like made in Scotland and brought over by traders. And everyone loved them. They're very warm. I always keep actually a tartan in my car in case my car breaks down. And I have like a big tartan blanket, basically. It's really warm. This is kind of a strange aside, but the Shannon Free Airport in Ireland was the first it was the first main airport in Europe. It was close enough to America. So any like cross-Atlantic flight, you had to leave from the Shannon Free Airport. And so they introduced the first duty-free store ever. And they sold like Irish goods. And one of the things they sold was blankets. And for some reason, I've come into possession of a Shannon Free Airport blanket. It like says that on there. And that's what I keep in my car to stay warm.
How old do you think it is?
So after the jet age, the airport became irrelevant basically
Yeah.
because you didn't need to be that close to the edge. Then people could just fly out of like London or Dublin. They didn't need this like little dinky airport out there. So it must be from the 50s, I would say.
Yeah.
Maybe late 40s. I don't know.
That's cool. I've never shopped at a duty free store.
No,
I don't really.
Yeah, you don't consume like fancy.
Anything.
Yeah, no consumption. Chocolates. They always have a big ass Toblerone. There.
I did buy a chocolate bar this week, which I'd never actually done at an Aldi before. But
yeah, like being someone who doesn't have a sweet tooth, the idea of like buying a candy bar at checkout just feels very. I don't know. I have like a vague memory of wanting to do that as a child, but it felt like it was because it's something that children do. Like, oh, I'm a child. I want a candy bar.
Yeah.
That's like what we like.
The supermarket I went to as a kid was a Mexican one, and they always had like cool pictures on the chocolate bars. I feel like the American ones now, I'm especially just like, there's nothing cool about like a Hershey's. It tastes so like produced. Too.
Yeah, no. Now they have like Joji fancy like single origin coffee, like single origin chocolate bars. But yeah, so these blankets were brought over to the U.S. and frontiersmen loved them, Native Americans loved them, and then eventually like. The one that we think of for hunting in America is the buffalo check, which is the red and black tartan pattern. And so it's actually, I guess, a lot of these tartans like trace back to Scottish families. So this is the MacGregor tartan, but it's also called the Rob Roy after the mythical Scottish hero. And so red and black is pretty good for hunting deer. Yeah. And when that's the main hunting of mammals in America, because deer and a lot of prey animals are pretty bad with red. And
they're red-green colorblind.
Yeah. And so you just need to break up your form, and then checks and flannels are good for that as well too. So this became kind of like a hunting uniform in the U.S. And so yeah, flannel shirts became a thing in America. This was not something that evolved like in England, which I think is pretty cool and unique because flannels do feel pretty intuitively American.
Yeah.
And from my readings, like they were either invented by Woolrich in 1850 or Pendleton in 1863 or Carhartt in 1889. And what's interesting is all those brands are still alive and well and doing very well nowadays. Yeah. I've definitely worn like all three brands at once. I can say that. Like I own like Woolrich and Pendleton stuff. I buy a lot of vintage Pendleton flannels. I love them.
Yeah. It's always a good sign if an invention got invented multiple times independently because that means it's like truly valuable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can just picture people holding these blankets and being like, why are we wearing cotton shirts? Like, why are we wearing cotton shirts and then covering ourselves in a wool blanket?
Yeah.
Let's cut out the middleman.
But yeah, it's interesting, noting that like these were effective for hunting because camouflage is a relatively recent invention as we're going to get into. It started to be worn by the U.S. military in 1940. People were hunting deer successfully before this. And when we were composing our Pinterest board, I was able to collect images, of modern hunting camo very easily. But I started to find 2 or 3 images of like an older American hunting aesthetic that you were really able to pin down and find a lot of examples of.
Yeah. And so this is, I guess we'd call like a mid-century American hunting, sporting fashion, is what we'd say. And so it's a lot of this. It's a lot of buffalo check. There's some photo evidence of this, but people weren't taking crazy amounts of photos on their hunting
especially
trips.
In color.
And definitely not in color. So a lot of this comes through in advertisements for like these new kind of sporting clothes that are being sold to the post-war automobile age Americans. And so you'll see a lot of like full buffalo check, like shirt, jacket, pants. And so that's actually called a Pennsylvania tuxedo, which I think is a fun term. I think it's a play on the Canadian tuxedo, which is full denim. I don't know why they own denim more than us. I think that America has a better denim claim, but that's besides the point. But yeah, and so like this style, I think we pinned it down pretty well. It's a lot of like tall lace-up boots, like again, no real camo yet. Cotton jackets, like waxed cotton jackets, flannels, fisherman's hats, so bucket hats with a lot of buttons pinned on them. Yeah, I think it's a great look. It's like kind of a look I sort of go for in Chicago when I'm going to a dive bar or something less dressy, is like a flannel with a waffle knit underneath. I just feel like it's a good look and always tucked in too. I'm pro tucking in my shirts broadly, but I think with flannels, if you don't tuck in your flannel, you look like a guy from a beer commercial. Is what I always say. Like if you're wearing like a t-shirt underneath and you have an untucked flannel, you just seem like the most average regular Joe, like from Central Casting.
Yeah. I mean, they sell those at like Walmarts even, it's a very slub look most of the time.
Yeah. And then of course I reserve a special amount of hate for the brand Untuck It, which is all based around like
Yeah.
shirts that are like cut a little bit shorter, like so that purposely you're not going to tuck them. I don't know. It's just maybe I'm just jealous of the money they've made, but I don't like them.
I mean, they probably get a little bit higher of a profit margin by not wasting the extra fabric at the bottom.
I don't know about that. I mean, that was a menswear world conspiracy theory about the shrinking of collars that happened in the 2000s. Was that like they're just trying to get any amount of fabric off of this that they can? I just don't know if the margins are that tight. Like, I think that the price of fashion is pretty divorced from the price of textiles. I think I've heard that.
So for the next section, we want to make a distinction between hunting and military fashion, because I think we'll probably do a military fashion episode in the future.
Yeah.
I think it's a pretty good idea too. You know, both they involve tactical gear, camouflage patterns, and guns, but there are big differences between the two. The big one being that the camo designed for the military, it's meant to trick the human eye, and then camo designed for hunting, it's meant to trick the eyes generally of mammals or birds. But it touches on this idea of the Umwelt, which we've mentioned on previous episodes. It's the specific way organisms of a particular species experience the world, which is dependent on what their sensory organs and perceptual systems can detect and interpret. And it's a really interesting idea for me coming from visual and critical studies, because like the way that different organisms interpret the world can be very layered and complex. So it is possible, you know, for a camo pattern to trick the human eye and the eyes of a deer theoretically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, well camouflaged hunter. Like it's hard for both to see. But yeah, like in hunting, you're trying to inhabit the Umwelt of like an animal up until the point that you kill them, basically, and you like reveal.
Yeah. And it's much easier for military fashion to bleed into hunting than the reverse, as we'll get into. But there is one big exception, and that's the U.S. Special Forces. They're colloquially called the Green Berets, and they do a lot of like missions that sort of resemble guerrilla warfare. They're in situations that there aren't like permanent U.S. troops stationed in, and they might be in an environment where there's not like military grade equipment or clothing available that's best suited for the mission. So they're allowed to pull from their own collection, and they sometimes wear hunting camo in order to blend in with the environment, because they do sneaky things.
Yeah, the idea is that like they can dispense with more of the military pomp and circumstance, like down to personal grooming too. They're all allowed to grow beards and stuff. And that wasn't always the case. Like you look at the same Delta Force operators from the 80s and 90s, and they have this look that people describe as combat accountant, because they're well shaved. They might have like a neatly trimmed mustache, but they're wearing like thick 80s glasses and short sleeve dress shirts. And so like our modern idea of like, you know, SEAL Team 6, the guys who killed Osama and stuff, is very like has just changed in 10, 15 years. But yeah, there's this idea that like they're allowed to borrow from the civilian market and camouflage they might wear during the hunting season, that they can have this kind of back and forth. They're allowed to take whatever from their personal stuff as long as it gets the mission done.
Yeah. And we have some pictures of it at the bottom of the Pinterest board. Kim Chilla helped us find those. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I'm just I miss the combat accountant days. I just don't like that special forces guys look like Duck Dynasty nowadays. That's my little, it doesn't matter what I think about this stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I just, why the beards? What's the appeal?
Yeah. Because hunting fashion, all of the aesthetics we're going to touch on, they're all generally interpreted as being conservative or conservative coded.
Yeah.
For me personally, like the only conservative guys that genuinely scare me are the ones with long beards who wear either sunglasses or those visors that are metallic. Because I oftentimes interpret them as being of the libertarian strain, where they're not religious, and I just think there's not much holding them back from killing people.
It's like if you take the conservative like worldview and you take the 10 Commandments out of it, then it's like, why not? Like they'll just be kind of force justified as opposed to like God justified. That would be pretty scary.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think that the combination of beard and then like the opaque sunglasses is just like, I can't get enough of a read on what's going on with you.
Yeah, I don't even know what your jawline's like. How am I supposed
I don't know your
to
jawline.
judge
I don't
you?
know your eyes. I don't know what you're looking at. Like it's a very low trust look, 100%.
Yeah. One more thing on military mustaches. So I read the book Rust, the Longest War. It's about corrosion. The author of the book talked about how with corrosion engineers, they're usually former military, or they're veterans usually, but they usually have mustaches too. And someone in the book discussion had a good theory about why that might be. And they were like, oh yeah, it's because people in the military, the only facial hair they can have is a mustache. So once they end service, they keep having one. And I was like, oh, that's a good point.
Yeah. I forget exactly what the rules are, but there's definitely like rules against seeming unshaved, but then you're allowed to have a mustache. So the interstitial is kind of tricky, basically. So my dad being in the military, he would sometimes use his hunting trips as like a chance to grow facial hair, because he could like within a week or two like get the start of it going beard wise, and then shave the beard and have enough mustache to like squeak in and then have a mustache for a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because for you, like, you've hunted a little bit.
My hunting is very light, I would say. Yeah, I guess my personal exposure to it. My dad was a hunter. He grew up in upstate New York. My grandparents, Jewish people who were like 1 or 2 generations out of the city. That side of the family didn't really pick up hunting, but my dad made a lot of friends, and he made friends with people that my grandpa would call woodchucks.
Yeah.
Just people who lived more in like the woods of upstate New York. And so my dad was hunting whitetails out east. When we moved out west, he would go to Colorado to hunt mule deer out there. His big thing he always wanted was an elk, basically. But my only hunting experience was being in upstate New York, and my grandpa was dealing with squirrels that were eating all of his sunflowers. And so my dad and my grandpa decided that like, we're going to have Joey shoot a squirrel, and then he's going to hunt, and it's going to be great. And I was interested. I was like, oh yeah, let's go. Yeah. So they got me like a BB gun, and we set up a peanut butter trap for the squirrel. And I like, we had me like set up my little sniper perch in the like breakfast room with the gun pointed outside. And it was like my dad over my shoulder, like parenting me. And then my grandpa over my dad, kind of like, I don't know, what's the term for it? Like driving from shotgun.
It's like that meme where it's like, each generation is like putting down the other one. And then the final one is like, you're pushing P. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just a lot of pressure, and I was very nervous, but I did pull the trigger and shoot, and I did get the squirrel. And there's a great little photo of me proudly holding it up by the tail. And then I remember we had to like, throw it out, of course, but for some reason in the middle of it, we froze it before throwing it out so it wouldn't go bad, and there was just a frozen squirrel in the freezer for a bit.
I mean, maybe your family was thinking of butchering it, because my grandfather actually, on my dad's side, he was born in Iron Mountain, which is close to the border of the Upper Peninsula.
Yeah.
But he has pictures of him where he like hunted squirrels and ate them. I don't know when he was born though. It might have been the Great Depression, because my family, my great-great-grandfather, my great-grandfather lived in Chicago. He was the only one who kind of lived away from the city for a bit, and it was just his childhood. He came back later, but I don't know why he was up there. It must have been because there wasn't a lot of work in the city for his family.
Yeah, squirrels, it reminds me of what we talked about in the scouting episode, where like the dangerous book for boys that I had, one of the things that they had like how to hunt, like kill and dress a squirrel. Yeah. And like they have this great diagram in there of how to skin a squirrel, and it's like you make these little cuts in it, and then you just whip it over your head, basically like you're shaking out a towel.
It's a really good way to get gross stuff in your hair.
Exactly. Like I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Yeah.
But no, yeah, there's something that feels very American about squirrel hunting. It's like a lot of effort to kill something that's like 8 inches long.
Yeah. One more thing before we get into the next section. So Kimchilla had another good point, though, on why like U.S. Special Forces wear hunting camo abroad. It's also, according to them, familiarity to troops, as the Taliban wouldn't be wearing it, and most soldiers would have recognized it from home. So I think there's something really American about hunting camo, because you really don't see it adopted anywhere else. Like it's really specific to here.
Definitely.
Yeah. So now we can start to get into the history of hunting camo. So some early examples before we get into proper camouflage. Native Americans would sometimes disguise themselves underneath buffalo skins while doing buffalo jumps. That was where like they would intentionally drive a herd of buffalo off of a cliff, and then they'd break their legs or die from impact. It wasn't a super sustainable way to hunt, but that was one way that they would use camo.
It's very like slash and burn, but applied to hunting in a way.
Yeah.
I heard there's very little actual like Western observers of buffalo jumps back in the day.
Yeah.
Like it was kind of like one of the last gasps of Native American life out there on the frontier.
Yeah, but they know the sites where that it would happen. And
Yeah,
you
'cause
can
it's
tell,
it's a geologic feature. Yeah.
yeah, you could tell how it would work.
You'd find a good like escarpment basically, and be like, oh, this is like the buffalo jump of this area.
Yeah, and then there are ghillie suits.
Yeah, this is like I didn't know it was like an Irish term in origin, Scottish.
Yeah,
But yeah, this is like the classic sniper outfit where you have strings of material and you kind of dress up like a bush to be hidden from sight.
Yeah, there's a good example in Civil War, the A24 film we did an episode on, where there's snipers in ghillie suits. Because they're used primarily for sniping because at like a short or medium distance, it's easy to tell you're moving. It doesn't look right. But if you're far away, you're very well disguised. But yeah, okay, so how did hunters in the US start wearing hunting camo? Well, they first started wearing army surplus from World War II. I don't know how it wasn't invented before then, but that was when the US military started wearing it. And the camo pattern that was popular was called frog skin. It's not very pretty. You still see people wearing it today.
It's not pretty, but it is like the most classic one. I'd say like it's what you kind of picture in your mind's eye of camouflage. I describe it as like the village people camouflage. Like, if you're going to be the stock image of something, like what would you pick? And so if you are assigned army man, you'd wear this one.
Yeah. And it's not always called frog skin because it became so popular amongst hunters that it started to be called duck hunter camo.
Yeah.
Because it really like saturated the market. I'm sympathetic to the idea that like civilians shouldn't wear military clothing, but also it's like, then why do army surplus stores exist?
Yeah. Army surplus is an interesting thing. I used to wear a lot more military surplus. Like a lot of it was just my dad's old stuff. I had like military boots and jackets. But also, I don't really know when this kicked off, but there is like an international military surplus world. Interestingly, when I was like going through my dad's things in upstate New York, all the like hunting cartridges I found were for British hunting rifles.
Yeah.
Not for British military rifles, like an Enfield. And so there's also guys in the US, if you really want to get into hunting on a budget, you can buy a like surplus from World War II Russian like bolt action rifle called a Mosin Nagant for $125. Like if that, like, so I think that while America has always had like its own internal military surplus, there's like a wider world as well. I even bought this like German military surplus jacket that still had a flag on the sides, but then a guy said to me like, "Great jacket, Germany shall rise again." And I was like, I gotta stop wearing this thing. And so I seam ripped the flags off and I still wore the jacket for a bit.
Yeah, I dated a guy for a little bit who had a Russian gun that he got at a gun show.
Yeah.
He was very hot.
Yeah, the gun show exemptions are real. That's been like, it's funny, they call those like a loophole in terms of buying guns. And it's like, is it a loophole if it's a mile wide? Like it's a form of buying guns where no one checks anything. Like,
I think they do that with like exotic animal shows too.
Oh yeah. No,
that
it's
happens.
hard to regulate. I went to a gun show in Vegas once. It's overstimulating.
Yeah,
I'd say it's just a lot going on.
Are people like actually firing the?
No. There's not like a built-in range there. No, it's not. And all the guns are like locked with cable ties and stuff. Like no one's gonna walk up to it, load it, and like start shooting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we should then kind of go into like, all right, so if that's like the classic, it's kind of hard to describe camo types. I guess we have to lean on the Pinterest board here.
Yeah.
But a further development in these is what we would call digital camo. Which can be a kind of a confusing like title because there's also what I would describe as pixelated camo as well.
Yeah. Digital camo, we're going to use it in reference to Realtree and Cryptech. It's sort of photographic in nature. It looks realistic. Pixelated camo, that term we can use to refer to the like mid 2000s soldier uniforms if we bring that up later.
Yeah. Yeah. So like the digital patterns that appeared, like I think we're probably getting like kind of pushed from the hunting world up.
Yeah. Yeah. These patterns, like I saw them a lot in art school because they were really in at the time. I never really interpreted them as being like photorealistic. To me, they just read as camo because I've been seeing them my whole life. But the photographic nature of them, it sort of made sense that it was popular amongst art school students at the time because post-internet aesthetics were so popular. And the super real aesthetic of, say, Hannah Diamond, I think fits in with this like high DPI camo that was coming out around this time. Yeah. But the early Realtree, it wasn't quite as photorealistic as what we have now.
Yeah. I think that like its success must be drawn to like, it has a very intuitive sense to it of like, oh, this camouflage kind of looks like the background, but this other camouflage looks so much more like the background. It must be so much more effective, and I must be so much more likely to get a deer this weekend. You know, I think it's out of this kind of like min-maxing sentiment of like, all right, like I want a guaranteed good time. I want to get my deer. Not that hasn't always, like, I mean, hunters are always trading tips, trying to refine their strategies and the tools they use. But I think that this was like something that people could feel like, all right, I'm getting the realest possible camouflage.
Yeah. This is something I didn't realize as a non-hunter city boy, is that oftentimes hunters go away empty-handed. Yeah. Like I went on a date last week with this former like deputy sheriff who's moving to Illinois. But anyways, I was asking about camo in the police force. I learned that they do wear camo sometimes for some reason, but he also had hunted. But I was like, oh yeah, what did you hunt? What did you kill? And he was like, oh, well, I didn't kill anything. And I was like, then what were you doing? Why were you going out hunting? And he was like, well, it's hard. Like I tried. And I was like, okay.
During this date falling apart. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, my dad had this story. The one time he took my mom hunting, but she didn't want to shoot anything, so she bought a camera instead, and they went off separately. And then they came back, and my dad hadn't seen like a single deer. My mom was like, "Oh, I saw tons. Yeah, I saw one." And she said that she described one of the deer she saw as a teenager, which I think was a really cute way to put it. Like it's an adolescent deer. Yeah. I just picture a very rebellious deer staying in its room blasting heavy metal music.
Yeah, my dog once got sprayed by a skunk that wasn't quite a baby. So I told my family that it got sprayed by an adolescent skunk, and they were like, "Okay."
It was a tween skunk. It was going through its
because it wasn't as bad. My dog didn't stink like. It was okay. We got through it.
We got through it. It's funny.
Yeah. So how did hunting camo get so prolific outside of hunting? So, after hunting camo patterns got developed, they started to get prescribed additional cultural meanings. We're going to get into this in the next section a bit. But you really started to see it like everywhere. Like reality TV is a very good way to see like when it got as prolific as it did. Mm-hmm. Teen Mom 2. The whole series, it has one woman who's from West Virginia, Leah, and she has this husband, or they were married for a bit, Corey, but they had like their wedding, their baby photos, like basically every occasion that they had on the show, they wore camo for it. It really just started to spread everywhere.
This is where I get a little maybe off my rocker, but I'm like developing this idea when it comes to like camouflage and these symbols of rurality, as I would say. So like, I'm going to go big kind of zoom out mode here, but just like as the urbanization of America really became a suburbanization, and rural areas lost what made them originally unique, which whether it was like, the demographics of the settlers who made them up, or their religious backgrounds, or, the specific industries or crops that they were growing, as everything kind of became a corporatized monoculture, of like giant factory farms, and then that employ less and less people. I think that there was just this loss of rural culture. And so there was a reaching out for any kind of symbol that could be used to unite these newly kind of flattened areas. And so some like symbols are a little too charged. Like you will see, the Confederate stars and bars, that flag. You'll see that in a lot of rural places. Famously, you'll see them north of the Mason-Dixon line for strange reasons. If I go up to upstate New York, I see those. Yeah. But it's because like that symbol speaks to a rural kind of character. But it is still, I would say, limited by its like Southern identification. And so I'm sure there's, for every Confederate flag you see in upstate New York, there's a lot of people who have the sentiment that they would like to run a Confederate flag, but they still know they're Northerners. And so I think that these less charged symbols like camouflage are a much safer rural identifier. It shows that like, this neighborhood's been like this community has been through a lot. We're not like what we were 50 years ago, but what we have is a connection to land. And we show that by wearing our like hunting clothing, wearing our camouflage.
Yeah. And Kim Chilla offered us some like insight into that too. Like they listed 3 sort of reasons, functionality, irony, and cultural identification. And that last one, that one really leads into it. They wrote that like hunting camo is used as a quick identifier of rural values / heritage and a willingness to change in light of modernizing / progressive social pressure. Yeah. It has an element of both autarky and an autochthonous claim to the local landscape. Like the wearer is connected to and is almost synonymous with the landscape.
I think what's also useful about it, I was saying it's not as charged as like the Confederate flag or those other kind of symbols of rurality, but it's also just so recent.
Yeah.
It's only been around since the 90s. It kind of references a rurality that doesn't lean on heritage at all, on a presentness.
I was trying to figure out when it became so commonplace. Like, when was it that you started to see camo prints on the seats of cars and on bottles and on bed sheets? It's hard to really pin it down. I know for sure it was like at least by when like Teen Mom 2 was being recorded in 2010.
The cultural touchstone, Teen Mom 2.
It's hard to say though if it was like the 90s, if it really got as prolific as it did by then.
Yeah, maybe more 2000s.
Yeah.
But it also gets into this, like, if it's a way for rural people to express themselves, and you kind of have to think, all right, what are rural people? And you get into this kind of idea of self-identified rurality. So City Nerd on YouTube did a video about this, and he leaned into the kind of culture war aspect of it, and he kind of like went out swinging. He was saying that many people identify as rural when, like, if you look at it objectively, they are not. And so he talks about the different RUCA areas, which is like a measure of like how urban a place is, and it has different types of it. So RUCA 1 is like, no bones about it, this is an urban area. And so in there, 22% of people see themselves as rural, which is very interesting because it's hard to say they're wrong, essentially.
They are wrong.
Yeah, but then interestingly, there's RUCA 2. So this is small cities or small settlements or towns, townships, but they're entirely like dependent on the economic catchment of a larger region. So in Chicagoland, I would say like Libertyville, Illinois. Like it was founded
out there.
What?
It's out there.
Yeah, it's out there. And it was founded as a self-sustaining thing. Like I think it was like lumber or something out there. But now it wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the city, its metro line, its rough proximity to the highway. It's entirely dependent on that. But in areas like that, 80% of people say that they identify as rural, which is really strange. And then RUCA 4 is interesting because that's like small cities outside the catchment area of a big city. So I would kind of say that my grandparents' town is that. You can technically commute into the city from there, but it's the end of the train line. It's truly like, it's quite a haul, and not a lot of people do it. More often people commute one town over, two towns over. And so those people, 37% of them see themselves as urban, and they kind of live a semi-rural life out there. So, but they see themselves as like, oh, I'm in the city compared to the rest of it. So it's just, I don't know, it's a hard thing to nail down, but when I think of those RUCA 1 people who see themselves as country, I think of my friend who grew up his whole life in Rogers Park in Chicago, which is an outer neighborhood, but it's 100% within the city.
Yeah.
And he had Realtree like seat covers on his lifted Jeep Cherokee and would listen to country music all the time. It's about cultural signifiers. It's not about like your RUCA thing, I guess sometimes.
Yeah. Because within America, there are so many ways to think of things in binary, and like within Chicago even, there are groups of people that view like different groups as being their opposite. Like on the south side, it's like their ire, they say like, oh, people up north.
Yeah.
Like for people on the north side, it's people in the suburbs. And then for people on communities that are on the very edge of the city, it's really like the city. That's who they're directing their ire towards. They want to distance themselves from it generally. Rogers Park is not a very good candidate because it's off the red line. I'm like, what's your excuse? Like people in Clearing or Garfield Ridge, like, that's that basically is the suburbs. Like I can see why people over there might want to think they might be rural, but
exactly. But I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky. Yeah, I do want to talk about like the two other points of like, okay, why do people wear hunting camo in outside of hunting context? It's like, one is just functionality. It's because like if you're on a budget, if you have to go out and buy a new backpack, you might as well get it in camo if you're a hunter. Yeah. Even if you're only hunting for 1 week a year, you don't want to have to go out and buy a second one.
Yeah. Because you can like something that isn't camouflage, you can't bring that hunting. But something that is camouflage, you can bring that into the human world, into the regular world.
Yeah. And not only do they need like just things generally in camo, but depending on how much they hunt, they might need multiple sets to match different environments and different times of year. Yeah. I was thinking about this too in relation to what we talked about with the preppers episode, because I realized with prepping, the demographic that being a prepper appeals to the most, they're like, conservative men in suburbs or in rural communities. They're very hard to shop for. They don't really like anything
Yeah.
in their lives that doesn't provide a function. But one way to get them to consume more is if they're convinced, like, oh, you need more for the end of the world. Like, that's one way to do it. But yeah,
And then you can also kind of like dovetail that into like, it's great for the end of the world. You can use it when you're hunting too. You can like come from a lot in the near term. You can use it on the next hunting trip.
Yeah.
In the long term, this become very useful when society collapses and you're the king.
yeah. But even if they're not a prepper, though, if they're a hunter who's optimistic about the future of the United States, they still need multiple sets of these things. It's a way for them to need more in their lives.
Yeah. I think, a lot of men are kind of unideal consumers, but like capitalism will find a way to sell them stuff. I think about catalogs like Duluth Trading Company, which is like if you have a dad, I would say skim through a Duluth this holiday season. You'll find something that they like. They have like pants that are advertised as ballroom pants. They won't crush your testicles. The kind of stuff that dads care about. Very like nuts and bolts, practical things. So even someone who thinks they're not hoity-toity will appreciate the ballroom pants.
Yeah.
We're not sponsored, by the way.
Oh, no, we have no sponsors.
We have no
just
sponsors.
Patreon. So subscribe to us there. But yeah, in general, though, like changing colors or offering a product in multiple variations, that's one way to just increase consumption. Like that's what GM did when everyone had a Model T. They didn't really need another car, but they were like, oh, our GM cars, you can get it in blue now, or green, or yellow. I also learned from a think piece or a video essay recently on YouTube about Bionicles that's what they were doing
a
too.
3-hour-long YouTube think piece about Bionicles. That's the kind of stuff I watch when I'm hungover.
Yeah.
That's my like go-to like horizontal media, as I would say, of me lying on my side.
Yeah. And then to conclude this section, okay, people wear camo for functionality, cultural identification, and then the last one is irony. And this is very different than like the internet irony that we see in today's world, where like people just do things out of malice. Like this is really just them wearing camo because it's a little bit funny. It's really not deeper than that.
Isn't it funny if my bedspread is camo? It's like, what am I hiding
it's
from?
So lighthearted.
It's
There's really nothing more to than that. Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, and then another type of, I guess, ironic wearing of it is, the adoption of realtree by like the urban left and often like gay people.
Yeah. Yeah, because like with hunting, there is a little bit of a liberal way to dress like a hunter. Tim Walz is a good example of this. He went hunting and had the media come along, and instead of wearing hunting camo like say Sarah Palin or Kristi Noem would, he wore like high visibility blaze orange, like a hunting vest, no camo in sight. And actually I found like a funny news article that I'll link in the show notes where they said like Tim Walz struggles with shotgun at pheasant hunt, gets mocked because he didn't successfully kill a pheasant.
Yeah, I think there are kind of two contemporary hunting fashion styles. Like the style we talked about earlier, like the mid-century one, that's kind of gone by the wayside. But I think it survives a little bit today in this style where, so the blaze orange thing, this is the high visibility orange. That's often very like mandated by the state. You have to wear a certain amount of square inches of that.
Like 400, 300.
Yeah. And so you can like put it all in one hat, or you can have it scattered throughout stuff. But it shows like a general kind of good citizenry and compliance with laws. And so Kinchilla brought up this kind of divide between more like tactical, militaristic coded hunters who want like the best stuff and they want like the most tactical rifle, and then FUD types. And so FUD types, coming from Elmer Fudd, is kind of old school, more small C conservative American hunters who just kind of care about hunting, don't really want to trade in the kind of militia imagery that can be associated with camouflage like that.
The Duck Dynasty kind.
Yeah, the Duck Dynasty thing. And so I think that, if Duck Dynasty represents that side, I would say the other side is kind of well represented by Orvis, which is an American like clothing outfitter. They're more fly fishing, I would say, but there's definitely no digital camo there. It's more khaki and like blaze orange stuff and maybe like older school earth tones. And so that seems like a more aw shucks law-abiding conservative as opposed to hiding in the woods paranoid conservative.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of like that there's two different versions. There's multiple hunting aesthetics. They're all kind of cool in their own way. Like high visibility blaze orange, it's a bit iconic if it is paired with hunting camo, Like for example, Chappel Roan had her Midwest Princess tour recently. She put out a hat, and then that actually influenced the Harris Walz campaign to make a similar hat that said Harris Walz in the high-vis orange font. But then the print of the hat was just like hunting camo. But to me, actually, it didn't even read. Like, if I see that hat, it doesn't even read to me as conservative. I just see like alt. I just see like it's a hat an alt person
like
would
because
wear.
of the political like logo on it. I mean, I would say even before like the Midwest Princess tour, I even hate giving it that kind of level of respect.
I know I don't like Chappel Roan like at all.
I say I'm a Chappel Roan skeptic is what I'd say. I don't know, but she gets like a lot of hate in some circles. People try and say that she's like rich. I don't think that's strictly true, but I think she plays her like humble roots up and down as needed. Which who doesn't do that? I think. But I remember like my gay rugby team releasing like a real tree. Not hat, but shirt before that. So there was already kind of like the stage set for this ironic, like you wouldn't expect a gay guy to wear hunting camo. And then I think by the time that that hat came out, it's like, no, I almost exclusively expect gay guys to wear hunting camo. Like they relish in the irony of it.
Because it is at peak popularity according to Google Trends. This year has been when it's reached, 100 in terms of search volume. But yeah, the gay guy look with hunting camo, I'm not a fan of, where it's like a hunting camo cap, a white tank top, pearl necklace, and then the conservative sunglasses. Because I think it's meant in a way, or it was originally intended to kind of confuse everyone. It was it's not meant to laugh with anyone. It's meant to confuse both conservatives and liberals. But now it just looks gay,
Yeah. I always think that like it's pretty boring to do the exact opposite of what's expected of you. You have to do like another turn on top of that.
Yeah.
Like it's just like
50-50.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'd love to see something that surprises me about the way that people wear this camo, but it's just, I don't know. Oh, we put on a hat. Like, oh, we put a slogan that you wouldn't expect to see on it. Or like, oh, it's in the form of a bikini.
Yeah.
Because that's what's it called? That brand.
Praying.
Yeah. Out of 2020, a brand that kind of straddles a line between like Brandy Melville coquettishness and Dime Square and all that. And then, this ascendant kind of rural aesthetics in the city.
Yeah. Because I do see this look. Like, for example, last week I was at a Whole Foods and I saw a woman with camo pants and then a high-vis blaze orange hat, like winter beanie. Like, actually, you could go hunting in that. Like,
but I don't believe you're going to, as we're at a Whole
shopping
Foods.
For fruit.
You might be vegan.
Yeah. Oh, and then one more thing on high visibility blaze orange. There was a recent headline that was kind of funny. Elusive deer spotted wearing high vis jacket in Canada. Who is responsible? I love how that's the end of it in scare quotes. But yeah, someone somehow tracked down a deer and got it into a high visibility vest. It's like a road safety vest. Kind of one more so. And I don't know, I'm a sucker for these. I always say like my favorite type of general interest story, which is like a story that you'd see on like, CBS Sunday Morning or like NPR in the old days. But it's like an animal that's in a place it shouldn't be is always funny to me. An animal wearing human clothes is always very funny to me. So the high watermark for me was the monkey wearing a fur coat in IKEA. That was as good as it got. Yeah. I don't think a single news story has really come close since to making me laugh. Besides that one lady, that one news video of a woman getting rescued from a chopper and then her the stretcher she was in started spinning around rapidly. That got me for like a week. I would just think about that at work. I don't know. I don't know why I'm like just trying to give people a look into my sense of humor, but that is what makes me laugh. Yeah. I mean, I just thought this was kind of interesting because why did anyone put a safety vest on? It's not to make it safer. It actually makes it more visible. It's just the intention. I can't figure it out. But I don't appreciate how the news article is acting like it's some great cruelty to put this on the vest when it's like,
we're going to kill this thing anyway. It's going to get hit by a car or a bullet at some point.
People are thinking to themselves, oh, we got to put this animal out of its misery because it's wearing a vest. It's like, no, you don't. Like, let it be. Like, that's actually the nice thing to do.
Yeah. Just let it do its own thing.
Yeah. And then hunting fashion. Okay. We both went to Bass Pro Shop in the last year.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, a fascinating place. I don't know, you can get anything there. I think you were just marveling at the guns a little bit, because had you ever seen that many guns before? Had you been?
I've never really been in, I think I might have been in a Walmart once where they sold guns. And I was also confused by that. But the fact that you can go into a store that's not a gun store and buy guns, it breaks my brain a little bit.
Yeah.
You never see that here.
No, yeah, you can buy like, of course, everything under the rainbow in camo. I remember buying a Stanley mug there before the craze.
Yeah.
Because I've always carried the like hammer tone green Stanley trigger mug. It's like my baby. Like I always have.
What's a trigger mug?
It's one that like has a just a trigger to open
a
the
latch.
things, so you can like drink with one hand, basically.
An adult sippy cup.
One would say, Nathan, an adult sippy cup of it. It's nice
Yeah.
when I'm driving or biking. But no, like. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's takes like the outdoor, I mean, they call it outdoor world.
Yeah.
And it is this like theme parkification of outdoor, like outdoorsmanship
Yeah.
in any form. There's like 15 million hunting rods or fishing rods. And it's just, I get very overstimulated in there. And the fact they have like aquariums and they have a kind of carnival shooting game
Yeah.
over there too. I don't know. I guess it's like being into classic menswear and like historic architecture. Like I always want to do the oldest version of something, which is why I like that mid-century American hunting fashion. But it feels so far away when you're in Cabela's. It feels like we're in this like 2000s onward hyper hunting fashion where everything is just like, I'm just looking at some of the compound hunting bows there that have like this complicated reticule and everything. It just feels so high tech. I felt like a caveman walking around there. And I'm like, and this is how people connect to nature with a carbon fiber recurve bow. Like,
yeah. I mean, hunting is kind of like prepping. It's a form of like male consumerism.
Yeah. I guess I always just choose the more like, I'm always form over function with a lot of things. Like,
yeah.
People were able to successfully hunt deer with bolt action rifles, wearing buffalo check, being out there in like LL Bean boots, you know, like why do we need to get so good at this? Like what? I don't know. Maybe I'm being too poetic about this. And if I was actually out there on a hunt, I'd be like, yeah, I would do anything to take home a deer right now. Like I would feel pretty cheated if I was taking paid time off and then I just come home with a good story. Like, no.
If you were to hunt, say next month, which aesthetic of the ones we'd cover would you go out and buy clothing from?
I would 100% buy myself a Pennsylvania tuxedo and then get laughed at every gas station on my way there.
Really?
I would say, like, no, I wouldn't do the full buffalo check, but I would try and just use enough of what I have in my closet. And then, yeah, I'd love to go hunting in Wisconsin someday. It's actually tricky, like hunting in Illinois. There's a lot of laws about, because we're denser than Wisconsin, basically. Yeah. So a lot of places you can only hunt with a shotgun. So you do like slug hunting, which is where you have a shotgun, but you load a slug, like a single bullet into it. And it's a very reduced range compared to like an actual rifle.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just kind of reflects, like the laws reflect the kind of settlement patterns these different places. So a lot of like people who do hunt in Illinois will drive all the way up to Wisconsin. My dad hunted in Minnesota. It was actually a very kind of cute story, but he was a resident and one of his patients, the husband of the patient was just like, I don't know how to thank you, but you can hunt on my land anytime. That's what he said. And this is actually the case of like the opposite of walking away with nothing. My dad was like all ready for a big hunting weekend.
Yeah.
And he got there and he just instantly saw a deer within 5 minutes and just lined up the shot and took it. And he was like out of there, he said, within 30 minutes. And he just kind of felt like a lot of like built up energy of like, I had a whole weekend planned around this thing. But,
it's like your first time playing a game and it goes really well.
Yeah. It's just like, no, I want a little bit of pushback here. Yeah. But he actually got that buck mounted. And I had it in my room as a child and it scared the shit out of me. I don't know. I had this weird nightmare where the deer would just turn its head and like look at me and be like, hey, Joey. And I don't know why that scared me. And then so I had my parents put it in storage when I was a child. And then I took it out of storage and I mounted it at my fraternity house. And that's where it remains to this day, the 5-minute deer.
Oh, you know what? I just remembered my ex-boyfriend, the one that lived with me for like 3 years, his family had a little bit of a problematic past. They lived in Africa as colonists. But his mom at one point was like, oh yeah, we have some like gazelle horns. Do you want to display them in your house? And I was like, yeah, I would. I thought it sounded cool. But anyway, I don't have any mounted animals in my house. But when I was a kid, we actually did have a deer in our home, but my family didn't kill it. It was gifted or something. Mm-hmm. It got roughed up. I mean, my whole house got roughed up because there were 6 kids and we were very chaotic and broke everything in my house. I mean, the fact I had my family's dining room table is a miracle, but it's literally falling apart. You know how shaky it is.
No, every time I go back to the fraternity house, which is not too frequently, deer's looking rougher every time. I think just a lot of like drunk girls go up to him and be like, "Oh my god," and just like he's all ruffled and stuff. His nose is getting like fucked up. My grandpa also has a stuffed black bear. That was just hit by a car around there, and then someone sold it to him. He got it stuffed.
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I think it's pretty out of fashion nowadays to have like actual mounted animals.
Yeah, because I think that like there are still circles where it's totally socially acceptable to hunt everything, anything you want. Like say Sarah Palin. Like I tried to find out how many animals she's killed, the different types, and it was like deer, elk, caribou, moose, boar. It kept going, which is in stark contrast to Tim Walz, where he was going pheasant hunting. I think it's a lot more socially acceptable for liberals to go out and hunt
birds versus mammals.
Yeah, like a turkey would be fine too.
Oh, yeah. We always mammals are close to the heart, and so we don't really like to imagine that too much.
Yeah.
Ideal, even further than a bird, is like invertebrates, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I mean, like fishing. Plenty of people who wouldn't kill a bird are fine fishing.
Yeah.
Oh, and on fishing, do you know Mary Peltola?
Yeah, she's the House of Representatives or Senator.
She's a congresswoman from Alaska currently, but she just lost re-election, so she'll be gone. But she had an aesthetic that was entirely basically based around fishing. Like on her campaign website, there's a whole section on her policies around fish. And she actually has missed a congressional session or two to prepare fish for the winter.
Yeah, this really I don't know. I never like to lionize politicians, and I want to be skeptical of all of them. But this just activated some part of my brain where I'm just like, hell yeah. Like I just think that every they're called representatives from a state. Like they should be egregiously that state. And so the person from like Alaska should be a Native American woman, where there's literally a video of her like gutting a salmon with the traditional ulak knife. Like, yeah, that's what it should be. It just makes sense. And it seems like, I don't know, I guess I'm always such a sucker for gestures towards like authenticity. And so the kind of Sarah Palin, like hockey mom type Alaskan versus someone actually walking the walk and gutting fish. Like, yeah, that just really works for me, I would say. Yeah.
No, she had a really cool vibe. Like, even the way her graphic design was for a campaign, it was in reference to Native American culture and just her whole aesthetic. Like I can see how she won in a red state.
Yeah, no, it's just like I was a fishing boat captain at age 14, and I'm like, cool, amazing. I don't know the typical age of a fishing boat captain, but that sounds crazy young for that. Like, good on you.
Yeah.
No. But yeah, but of course, that's also very important to Alaska's whole image of itself is salmon and salmon fishing. An ex of mine actually. Her dad was an academic and her grandpa was an academic. And so on summers off, they would go to Alaska and be a part of the like salmon fishing trade and just like go out on a boat and do that. And they worked with this really crazy sea captain. And one time when the captain couldn't get them, he was just looking for anyone who would work. And he hired some strippers. Actually, to gut fish. And I think one of them did pretty well and stuck around for the whole season, and one of them did not. But yeah, they're just there's not a lot of options in rural Alaska out there. It's just needed some people.
That was like something out of a Sean Baker film.
Yeah, no, it does. Yeah, like a stripper with a heart of gold working on a fishing vessel. Yeah, or Coen Brothers, maybe I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so integral to Alaska's image of itself is salmon and salmon fishing. And then like in Maine, I think a very safe object of like statehood is the lobster. You can just be real into lobster.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a politician, you kind of have to videotape yourself eating, catching, killing lobster if you're like a politician from Maine.
Yeah.
It's actually like a birthright, apparently. I think only people born in Maine can fish for lobster.
Really? It's a birthright kind of thing?
So.
That's interesting because, there is like for Native American populations, like with seal hunting in provinces in Canada, like it is like very ethnicity locked, like only they're allowed to do it. But the idea that it makes sense for tribes, of course, but just like vague statehood, like, I was born here. I have the Maine birthright. I'm allowed to wear LL Bean boots and hunt lobster, fish lobster.
Yeah. Well, I think Americans are like yearning for regionalism. That's part of why hunting camo is so prolific. And it doesn't identify a particular region. It just is the idea that you still are rooted.
Yeah, you still have like a connection to land. And we can feel very far from that. Do you know what Illinois state animal is?
I would like if it was the bison, but it's not, is it?
It's the white-tailed deer.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's
I learned that
interesting.
in grade school. I forgot.
I think because I learned that Nevada is. I mean, they taught us that the state animal is the bighorn sheep, which you can also hunt.
Yeah.
And to me, it was hard to hold that in my mind. Like, but I think I understand it more now. Like getting into the mind of a hunter is just that. Like, yeah, of course we love this animal. That's why we kill it.
Yeah.
It's like to hold that respect for it. Like this is our namesake, and it makes a lot of sense with something like a lobster, where it's like this is like true like an economic engine for us. Like of course we love it. We structure like our economy in a certain way around it.
Yeah, but I mean for cultures historically across time, if they were totemic, their totem animal, they wouldn't actually typically kill it. It was taboo to do so.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know. I can push back on that a little bit. I don't know. I've always thought that white-tailed deers are cool though. Like when people ask me what animal I think, I won't say the stupid spirit animal thing, but yeah, like what animal am I similar to?
Yeah.
People will comment that they say I'm deer-like.
You are, yeah.
I
think it's like your mousy coloring, I would say.
Yeah.
I'm very drawn to elks because moose are goofy. Like, you know, they're not proportionally right. They're not graceful or anything, but like an elk has a certain like mystique to it. I feel like it's
they're more noble.
Yeah.
You see them on crests more often.
Yeah. No, I've always liked stag imagery. That's why I was kind of bummed, like reading the Harry Potter books as a kid, and then like Harry Potter, the main character, his like Patronus spirit animal was a deer. I'm like, oh, man, I want that to be mine. Like, I don't know. It's just such a good main.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would be like, oh, you're like a carnivore, Nathan. I don't get that vibe.
Sometimes you got to know that about yourself, you know.
I'm not.
Not
like that. So to conclude, what do you think? Is hunting fashion?
I mean, it's a statement whether you're intending it or not. You know, like you can say like, oh yeah, I just own so much of this stuff. I'm hunting all the time. Of course I'm going to wear it to just like run errands. And it's like, I don't know. You choose what you wear when you leave the house. I think in our Discord, we were talking about like the idea of judging people based on their clothing choices. And I'm kind of a defender of this. I'm just like, you chose to wear it unless someone else dressed you. Like this is something you want to say or not say about yourself.
I do think though that the quality of clothing has gone down so much. It's so hard to find anything new that's good. Unless you're spending an absurd amount of time getting vintage clothing like you do. And like I do a little bit less, in which I do, but to a lesser degree. It's like, yeah, it's hard. I give people slack because H&M is horrible.
I think it's just like, I think there's still some you can like kind of glean from it, but it's not like exactly what they're wearing. It's just, I would say like level of dressed up and like whether you're wearing a graphic t-shirt or not, like what's on it, like literally like the most. I'm not reading so deep into it. Like if you're wearing a hoodie, then you have a shame about
like
yourself.
My family
like,
is
it's not that deep.
My family's doing Christmas this week, and I just know someone's going to show up in like a pajama onesie, and I'm going to be like disappointed.
Come on, it's a little bit fun depending on what they.
I'd like to dress up for it.
Yeah,
but my opinion, okay, is hunting fashion? I think so because all of the way that hunting clothing is designed is for the human eye. I think that if the people designing hunting clothing were seriously considering the Umwelt of animals, they'd recognize more that sight is not their dominant sense. It's usually smell. They do sell like scent-free, quote-unquote, clothing, but clothing brands are not letting on how ineffective it is. It works a little bit, but it's not as good as they'd like to act. But yeah, I think that, again, ultimately, it's like we think that like making it blend in visually is the most important thing, but to animals, blending in the scent would be even more important.
It's really hard to get outside your belt. Like it's hard to actually put yourself into the mind of a deer. Like you'd have to toss away these very intuitive things. Yeah. Like hyper realistic to the human eye camouflage.
Yeah, because you saw that article I linked where it showed what it looks like from the perspective of a deer. It's much worse than I would have expected.
It's like, how are these guys surviving? Like they're just like, this is what a prey animal sees. Like I always assume prey animals like had like hyper acute vision, but it is, they have like range, you know, they have like nearly 360 degree vision, but it's just, they're not great with reds.
Yeah.
Cause reds is like, you know, it's to spot blood and like fruit, I guess is the background of that.
Yeah, they don't see high visibility blaze orange. So for listeners, that might be good enough for you, but you can also dress in British hunting fashion or just do standard camo. Yeah. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. This was a really good topic. I think we will do the military fashion one in the future.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, thank Thanks for listening.
Thanks. Bye bye.